Being a therapist, I know the work doesn't end when the session does. Notes, billing, scheduling, insurance follow-ups, it can all eat into your nights. That's why Katie and I use Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com.
This episode is sponsored by The Receptionist, a sign-in app company. The Receptionist for iPad is a HIPAA-ready digital check-in system that allows you to easily check in clients and take your time back. Learn more by visiting thereceptionist.com/MTSG and get your first month free.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our professions, the clients that we serve, how we conceptualize that we're working with them. And let's be honest, sometimes working with kids and teens can feel less like therapy and more like trying to decipher what 6-7 and skibbity toilet and whatever language that kids are bringing in these days. And we know that this population, they're our future, but there are a lot of things that just seem to get lost in the ways that therapists can work with adolescents, work with youth, and really being able to bring things along. This is a population that's near and dear to my heart and my practice. And we're going to cut through a lot of the noise today, and we're talking with Dr. Will Dobud about working with youth and how therapists can conceptualize and bring a lot of this together. So thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
We're excited to have this conversation, but before we get started, let me ask you the question we ask all our guests, which is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
Sure. So my name is Will. I'm just a massive psychotherapy nerd. And even though my accent is a jumbled mess these days, I grew up in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., studied social work in Maryland, was working with youth in a range of settings from intensive outpatient to residential facilities, doing most of that in the outdoors, doing a lot of outdoor therapy stuff. I was lucky that brought me like all over the country. I worked in Alaska a little bit, in Arizona, upstate New York, North Carolina, one of my favorite places on earth, West Virginia. So a lot of different contexts. And then I met my wife and came to Australia. So I've been kind of zipping back and forth ever since. I think my take on youth mental health is, I don't know if it's unique, but I don't know. I think sometimes we've overcomplicated something that could actually be much more simple. And so when I read things like adolescents are the hardest to engage in therapy, there's a bit of me that thinks maybe you're trying too hard. And and so there's times that I think that we've overcomplicated things a little bit.
One of the questions that we start a lot of our episodes with is not from a shaming place, but from a collective wisdom if other people have made mistakes sort of place. But what kinds of mistakes do therapists make in working with youth that we can maybe help our listeners not make themselves?
Sure. So one of the things, and we've all witnessed this over the last decade, and the rise of how we, cultural awareness of social justice. And that is usually attributed to race, to gender, to cultural background. And one thing when it comes to age, it seems to me that sometimes that's off the table, that the older somebody gets, the more likely there is to be harm in aged care facilities and the treatment of older people. And that also happens the younger that people get. I think if we took the 1,000 types of therapy, I think if we took play therapy, there's not many other that were actually developed just for children. So we think that a lot of times we'll take cognitive behavioral therapy off the shelf and then make some tiny adjustments, and then voila, we have a youth therapy. And so a lot of times I think that we miss out on a lot of research from child development about play, about interactions. We assume that, and for instance, the adolescent brain is ready to sit and, talk about big, deep feelings or what's going on in their unconscious. And we also see some literature that teaching self-regulation techniques to the younger child might not be as helpful as we all think that it is. So I think sometimes it's overcomplicated when it can really just be focusing on doing things together and an investment in physical activity. And I don't mean like exercise. I remember when I came to Australia, I would go into residential care facilities, and everybody just plays Uno, the card game here, and you just see kids talking and playing, and they get deeper while there's some activity. So sometimes I think too much sitting and talking might miss the mark with some kids. And I'm a diehard common factors person, so I don't think there's one therapy that is better than the others. So I think everyone's using the therapy that aligns with them the most. I also think the labeling is getting to a place for me, and I don't mean labeling or I know the mental health care system in the Western world is set up around diagnoses if we want third-party reimbursement. One of the things is I think there has been an othering that has happened in the world today when I looked at youth and while doing my research, that youth are called fragile today. You know, the most best-selling nonfiction book last year labeled an entire generation as anxious. And I think that this inherently goes, look at the kids like they're in the zoo. I talked to someone who said they called middle school in their school district, that's called the zoo because the kids
Oh,
are so out
no.
of control. And so if you've othered the children, that means the children have to change to fit in with you instead of just letting them be kids and kids do kidsy things. And teenagers are inherently challenging, a little bit oppositional, and a lot of this is actually totally natural. So I think sometimes we have to remember that there are things that the adolescent client is going to do that are going to somehow fit into the diagnostic criteria that might just totally be normal kid stuff.
I think that there's a renewed focus on youth. There's a lot of, at least in the media, discussion about the youth mental health crisis and those types of things. And I don't know if that's an extension of this fragilizing of that generation. But what do you think is causing that quote unquote youth mental health crisis, or the perception of a youth mental health crisis?
So I think there's sort of two sides to this. One is the concept of whether or not some of this is fabricated, because we know that the measures we use, we're screening more often. I mean, there was data that came out of a school district in Florida just recently looking at the data from the phone bans in the school, and mental health screenings in this district went up by 1,500 students. And so the more we screen, the more numbers are going to increase. So there's a bit of me that wonders if some of this looks larger because of we're testing for this stuff more often. With measures like the PHQ-9, which we know has a false positive rate above 60%. We also know that there's a large study about the PHQ-9 out of England, and I think it was 2011, where for the people in the study that did not screen for depression, they tested, I don't know if that's positive or negative. They did not have depression. Over 40% of them still left with a prescription for antidepressants. So we're intervening more, we're screening more, and that's going to cause this rise in numbers. So there's a bit of me that wonders about the fabricated side. There's also the side of we're seeing emergency room visits for all the wrong reasons. Not a kid falling off the monkey bars, but for self-harm. We're seeing how youth suicide has steadily increased over the past few decades. And so there's that part where young people, when they're in self-report surveys, they're saying they're lonely. So we have this loneliness epidemic, which should be really startling for adults, considering kids typically spend, like 80% of the year surrounded by children and surrounded by adults at school. So something's going on there as well, that a kid could be around this many adults and feel invisible. So I think one of the things that has shifted in society, and yes, social media and technology has something to do with this, but youth anxiety has been decreasing since the 1950s. So that's far removed from just the phones. And I think it has to do with, as things get more complicated, all of us, we get home from work and we go, I'll do 3 more emails while your child is staring at you and wanting to play. That many of us have become more siloed away in our life. Outdoor play has decreased, and I'm not being just an outdoor salesperson, but kids going out and taking risks and making mistakes. And now we have kids that are telling us they're anxious and don't want to go out. And, we're seeing, kids don't drink beer anymore. Kids are having less intimate relationships. Again, not saying everyone needs to drink beer and have sex. It's that I think that there is something that has happened in the water, not technically, that is making it so youth don't feel really comfortable to contribute. So I think we have a massive engagement problem. And that's where I think therapy could help, but we have to really focus on engagement in our services, not necessarily what's wrong with the kids all the time. Have we given them something to engage and participate in?
Being a fellow therapist, I know the work doesn't end when the session does. The notes, the scheduling, the billing, the insurance follow-ups, all of that admin can quietly take over your nights and weekends.
And we've both seen how the right systems can really change what private practice feels like. When we're talking with therapists who are overwhelmed, one of the biggest pain points is trying to hold too many disconnected pieces together.
That's why we want to share Simple Practice. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high trust certified, and built specifically for therapists.
Simple Practice is designed for the real-life complexity of private practice, helping with everyday admin that can pile up between sessions.
My favorite part? The all-in-one integration. Notes, billing, telehealth scheduling, and client communications are all connected in one spot, so I'm not bouncing around between separate systems.
And their AI scribe note taker can help make documentation more thorough and much faster, so you can spend less time catching up on notes and more time focused on your clients and your life outside of work.
Plus, if you're starting out or growing your practice, Simple Practice also offers credentialing support, which can take a big headache out of insurance enrollment.
If you're ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice.
Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months.
Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
It seems in retrospect, and I have a couple of kids myself that are around middle school age, but really it seems like the isolation that occurs because of lack of third space, the amount of even just being in activities requires, extensive commitments that don't just naturally happen. The COVID effects on a lot of the youth that are happening here today, it seems like so much of what's happening is just more and more isolation and connection through devices as opposed to many of the things that you're talking about. My middle schooler was talking about that it's the first time that one of his friends, kind of broke a bone and got sent to the emergency room in 7th grade. And I was thinking, that was a 2 or 3 times a year occurrence for kids in the classes when I was growing up. So
I broke my bone at my arm in 2nd grade.
So there just does seem to be a lot of just protecting and isolating the kids away from life that I think is part of something that we have to conceptualize as part of therapy, is not just necessarily in our offices. Is this consistent with what you're seeing as well?
Totally. This is something that as we started, and I think, there's part of me that looks at a lot of things that have contributed to this. When they used to put missing children on milk bottles?
Yeah.
Like that created a huge moral panic. As did stories of when they trick or treat, there's going to be someone giving your kid a poison apple. And this is really easy to sort out. I remember my mother told me this: don't take anything that's not in a wrapper.
Yeah, right.
You can solve this really quickly. And and then stranger danger. All of these things create this sort of moral panic. Now, one thing, and I might be a total weirdo about this and might be on the wrong trajectory with this argument. When I heard arguments about the phones, I think you could do the exact same thing to 24-hour news, which is just bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news. We're divided, we're divided, we're divided. And then if someone votes a different way than we do across the street, we sit there and go, oh, that person, they're a this. And I think what it did is it did take away exactly what you said, Curt. That third space is essential to community. In many places, it could just be like the local pub and everybody gets together on a Sunday and hangs out, or club sports for people that aged out of sports. There's so many different ways. And so kids really need more unstructured and unsupervised time to learn to play. So, for instance, if kids haven't had the chance to play house, how are they going to have a more serious, intimate relationship in their adolescent years when they have real feelings and real hormones, and they haven't even played or trialed out this idea or played shop? So really, the play is a big component of this. And then for us, as we get busier as adults, one of the things, have we actually given kids something to imitate? Have we taught them to play? So for instance, as someone who, has written about and been trained in solution focused, I was on the radio here in Australia where it's like the most sweeping phone bans and social media bans in the world. And I keep saying to them, just like the miracle question, okay, tomorrow, elves come and they steal all of our phones and there's no more laptops and there's no more technology. What are you going to do with your kids? And I think most adults know the answer to that. Well, we're going to have to talk at the dinner table. Okay, so do we need federal government legislation to learn how to talk at the dinner table? Maybe. Like, obviously, there's really bad things on social media, like kids fighting and, giving your kid a piece of technology so they can invite 7 billion strangers into your home. Like, there's really creepy parts about it. At the same time, I think there's something much more simple than this new moral panic that's happening.
Well, first of all, how optimistic of you to think that kids can even imagine affording a house in the future.
Oh my
And second, I think there's also a parenting emphasis that kids have to get along all of the time, and that there isn't even like, all right, you kids are arguing, playing house. Johnny is cheating at house. Yes, go deal with that, rather than coming in and refereeing every single interaction that ends up happening. That the parents are to blame, obviously, in this, but there's a parenting aspect too that's just our own discomfort in having the children have discomfort.
Yeah, and that's where when I think about when I was saying, like, is there a youth mental health crisis, or is some of this just our own adult anxieties about youth and what they experience? Like Erik Erikson, and I want to touch on COVID for a second, but we all learn Erik Erikson in our Psych 101 class. And Erik Erikson talked about, we learned how to stop stunting the growing body by putting kids in factories. And now we have to stop it because of our own anxieties and learn to let live a little bit. And the blueprint for development is there. Speaking on factories and linking this to COVID, as an American social worker, like, my profession is eternally linked to the work of Jane Addams. And Jane Addams has a book from 1909 called The Spirit of Youth and the City Streets. I highly recommend it for anyone who's a real social working nerd person. Very dense, hard to read, and really challenging.
It sounds awful.
It's tough. It's really tough. But she talks about youth crime in Chicago in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and links it just to school and forcing kids to memorize and learn to read and learn mathematics. And she was friends with John Dewey, so she's probably thinking of experiential education and moving around, give kids things to do, and the amount of kids in the factory. working in these horrible places. And there's an interesting polling of children who worked in America in one of the most like awful, full of chemicals, horrible conditions factory. They interviewed like 4,000 of them. Most of them said they'd rather be in the factory than go back to school, which is an interesting century ago anecdote. But one of the things that happened, and Australia was a really interesting case example of this. So the city of Melbourne, I'm in Adelaide, that's about an hour's flight from me. Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world. And so the state of Victoria had the strictest COVID policies. And I didn't think much of it. I just thought, I feel really bad for the people who are living there. That's a really tough 2 years. And then in 2022 and 2023, when that opened up, 40% increase in youth crime. Now, youth crime has been steadily deteriorating since like 2010. You could link that to a whole range of things. Again, that could be fabricated by how we count things and decriminalizing things. But a 40% increase is a huge spike in youth crime. And as I was reading the Jane Addams stuff, I went, oh my gosh, we didn't give them something to participate in, and look what happened. Again, not claiming it's just an association, not saying that's the cause. So we do have a lot of good research, good evidence, good ideas about youth development that I think we could get a reminder in thinking we do have to let kids have arguments. And you can think about like a litter of kittens or like puppies. They're going to fight, and they, through rough and tumble play, and it doesn't have to be fighting, it's playing. Through that rough and tumble play, dogs learn mouthing, where it looks like fighting, but really it's dogs playing. And so that's where you get a dog that, I've had one dog in my life, and so I am no expert on this. But, when a dog play fights with you, it's fun for everybody. And so the dog's not going to hurt you, and so you can have this battle, and then they get exhausted and you go on your way. And so I think sometimes what looks like fighting isn't. But I think a lot of this, many parents inherently know, and then we've also have so many levels of bureaucracy and legislation and administrative crap that where I come from in Maryland, they banned tag on playgrounds, like the school district. So what teacher went to university, got a degree, got a job out of school and said, you know what I want to do with my 15-minute break? Police tag.
I'll do you one more, or not to make this a one-up competition.
That's it.
I used to work at a school that banned imagination play.
Oh, no.
Come on.
No imagining. It was...
This sounds like some sort of dystopian movie that you're talking about, Curt. That's not cool.
Your time is valuable. Whether you're hyper-focused on admin tasks like billing or simply trying to make a cup of coffee between appointments, constant interruptions can derail your entire day.
This episode is sponsored by The Receptionist, a sign-in app company. The Receptionist for iPad is a HIPAA-ready digital check-in system that eliminates the need to walk back and forth from your office to the waiting room to see if your next appointment has arrived. Clients and patients can securely check in for their appointments, and you'll be immediately notified by text, email, or your preferred channel. Break free from interruptions and make the most of your time.
Start a 14-day free trial of The Receptionist for iPad by going to thereceptionist.com/MTSG. Make sure to start your trial with that link, and you'll also get your first month free if you decide to sign up.
As I'm listening to you, Will, I think there's this element of not being able to sit in discomfort, our own difficulties with conflict, and not allowing children to be able to learn how to navigate those conflicts. There's understanding relationships and having real relationships. But there's a lot of different things I want to talk about. But the thing that relates to this in particular is this idea of a whole separate type of relationship or separate types of relationships that younger generations are having than especially mine. And so there's the social media relationships, being in relationship with people you've never met before, AI relationships like character AI or ChatGPT or Claude or those types of things. And so there's a lot of different ways that technology is also playing into how we interact with the world, how we interact with the people around us, and even with ourselves through, some sort of AI character.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on technology being folded into our lives as far as just generally? You've already kind of mentioned that, but as far as children who are learning how to develop relationships, there are these other ones that some adults don't have as much understanding of, and as a society, I don't believe we actually have a lot of research and data on, for example, safety or privacy or those types of things. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the technology angle is really interesting, and it's obviously just that's the landscape where young people are living today. And so it is deeply troubling that AI would replace a human to human, heart to heart sort of connection. But also there has been, I think us as therapists, I mean, what's our product is sitting and talking to each other. And so, or doing something together. And I think that we could really help parents understand the importance by, what we put out there when we work with parents and young people, that the young people are going to, if they're starving for connection, they're going to gorge elsewhere on something else. And so they're going to find it in, like, we used to talk about this with like gang involvement. Without the connection, the easiest way to get connection is peer-to-peer connection instead of having an attachment-based connection. So young people will seek it in any way. We see this with children, that you can put a baby on the ground, it will find mom or dad and crawl right to it. You don't need arrows on the ground to know where connection is. But today, if there isn't that kind of secure connection, what will happen is they will get that connection everywhere else. And the tech companies, this is an interesting anecdote, that if you listen to many popular like comedy podcasts over the last few years, you might get an Amazon advertisement, maybe a Google advertisement. I think they were the two biggest sellers of ads on podcasts when we looked at this data. Number 3 was BetterHelp. So
Yeah.
think about how much money went into comparing to Amazon levels of money to go, here's the easiest way to go and get therapy. And it's not, you're still distant from somebody. And I'm not poo-pooing on telehealth at all. Like, we were miles late to that game at the same time. But so I think it's the part of what I see as the biggest problem is a social connection problem. So it's no surprise to me that young people are going to run to anywhere where they can find social connection. And what we know about the character AI and all the different AI bots is they either sort of really go over the ledge and have, are implying for suicide or hurting your parents. We have all these cases about that. Or it's just giving young people everything they want, which we've tried that with participation trophies, or like not giving grades at school, or like it's reinforcing many of the things that I think many of us adults worried about youth are trying to avoid. So I'm definitely not someone who's on the moral panic train about social media, but again, we have to be adults in kids' lives who give them something to imitate. So if we can't put down our phones at the dinner table, how are we going to expect that our kids have learned this thing? Or if we haven't taught how to play with each other or how to handle a little, some discomfort, how can we expect that from our children?
I want to go to a different point because I think it's related, but also I think along something that you were talking about earlier, and it's been kind of playing in my head, and I want to make sure that I don't forget it. But when we're looking at whether it's Kurt's dystopian school that doesn't allow creativity, or there's no tag, or there's those types of things, the word that kept coming to mind, or there's two words. One is helicopter, and the other one is micromanage. And I think that there's been, for years, to your point, not just with the phones, but for years, there's been this move towards parents needing to design their children's lives to the minute. And whether it's, you know, elite sports or academics or this group or that group or these types of things, it feels like there is a huge loss of the way I describe it is critical thinking, but I think there's also independence that's lost. If kids don't get bored, if they don't risk, if they don't have opportunities for creativity, we really are leaving them very susceptible to whether it's harmful relationships and kind of being guided into an AI deep well of negativity, or just not knowing how to become an adult and not knowing how to do the things that all of us that didn't have some of these things are able to do. And so shifting more into kind of solutions and that type of stuff, if we're talking about a lack of independence and potentially even mastery because they're not able to try things or told how to do things, they have parents go with them on job interviews. How are we as clinicians able to support stronger development? Because it seems like society says you need to have all of these extracurriculars and all of these things happening so that you can get into the right school. Or if you're on a different type of kind of socioeconomic status, potentially you're having to care for siblings or you're having to work or those types of things. And there's not this free space to play, to create, to make your own decisions. And so what's the answer? How do we solve this?
Well, I actually think there's some of this that's, again, in some ways a little bit simple. When we think of the overscheduling, like that's still not unstructured play. So that's
Yes.
still, and I'm sounding like a real play-based person, and I'm not. I love to play, so I'm an expert at it. So, but the other thing is, I remember reading, this is when I was doing my PhD, and I was going and visiting all these outdoor therapy programs and then all over the world. And I was interviewing people who had gone to outdoor therapy in their teenage years. And, I learned all everything about relationship and the kids talking about, hey, that therapist was really cool and nice and a real human and treated me like a person and all the things that we know. At the same time, some of the literature I was reading was talking about like mastery. And I went, this sounds really familiar because us outdoorsy people, we all look at Outward Bound and these type of programs. And Outward Bound's kind of, even though it was around since World War II-ish times, like Outward Bound's, when it was conceptualized by academics, how the hell does this work? This is in the 70s. They said success and mastery. So I went down this rabbit hole of success and mastery. And I found, studies at Johns Hopkins by Jerome Frank focusing on mastery in mental health care, in inpatient treatment, where they found they could just get people doing things and attributing their success to themselves through the line of questioning from the worker. How are you able to do that? Have you been successful like this before? Sort of really, but giving the patient something to do. I kept going back in the 30s, one of the first child and adolescent psychiatry conferences. In the proceedings, it talked about the most important thing we can do for children is give them experiences of success and mastery. So that doesn't mean setting up all the success for them. Sometimes failing at something was still a success in the trying. So when we look at failure or just simply mastering tasks, what we want is the success and mastery internalized. So when somebody does, how did you get to this appointment today is really sometimes a huge ask for people where we might be one step too far ahead. So loosening up the curriculum at school, loosening up the manual in the counseling room, we get the opportunity to really focus on what are youth experiencing and how can we help them internalize experiences of success and mastery. And then, to use another John Deweyism, then it can be scaffolded, that we can do harder things, more difficult things. So everybody learns when they're learning guitar, they learn it one string at a time. Then they learn the cowboy chords. Then they learn their scales. Then they, and it gets harder and harder and harder. But they're only going to start getting better is if we give them something to internalize that sense of mastery, which I think reorients people, as you were saying, to far more critical thinking because they know they have something to offer. They know they have something to contribute. So in many ways, in our recent writing, what we were writing about is just what does good democracy look like? People have something to participate in. They can contribute. They feel like their vote matters. But in a classroom that's just about memorizing, does your opinion really matter? If we're just following the manual, are we really tailoring the world to our young people? So I think if we can keep democracy, mastery, what people experience in the back of our mind, we'll start to ideally shift some of these things that we're talking about that are all real concerns that many people are talking about.
I've had a lot of young adult clients and even some youth clients where when I ask the question, how how did you make that decision or how are you going to decide what to do next or those types of things. I've literally and I know I've said this before on the podcast. I've literally had clients say, "No one's ever asked me my opinion."
Yeah.
And there's that and I know this is an overstatement. I know there's a lot of different ways that people raise kids and that kind of stuff, but I worry that too much has gone to the opposite of what you're talking about, which is let me dictate, let me provide, let me give you everything but the very final result. And so kids might feel more like doers, not thinkers. And I think we need both to be able to be successful in life.
Absolutely. And Curt, you said something very resonated with me. Yesterday, I went to a meeting where young people I'm in Australia at the moment, coming back to America at the end of the month, but there's two Americans and they grew up in foster care. And one of them has come here to go to school and the other one's come to visit. And they're doing this advocacy work where they're getting the organizations that work with the out-of-home care field. And they're talking about the youth experience and the what it's like to be a young person growing up in this system. And one of the things, they age everybody out of this at 18, which, as you said at the start of this, as if they're ready to buy a house, as if the most affluent family in the world, their kids are ready to buy a house at 18, right?
Sure.
And so listening, I could see the suits and ties in this meeting. It was all CEOs and directors of these large NGOs. And and I'm sitting there going, they're squirming because the kids are saying, how come no one ever asked me what I wanted? And I'm not saying give kids everything they want because they'd have ice cream for dinner every day, But there is something about we kind of sometimes, and I think every therapist listening to this will know this. They just have to look at somebody they work with. And again, not saying to judge all the therapists, but they'll see someone who they say they're tailoring to what the client wants, how the client is presenting in the session, and then what do they result to? What they know best, what they do on average, and then they just stick with that. So there's a risk of partnering with youth because they're wild. They want to push back at the system. They want to deviate from cultural norms. That's a risk to adults because it changes the way we see things. But with any risk comes the opportunity for something to go wrong or the opportunity for something really cool to happen. So like with young people, how could I ever ask that person on a date? What if they say no? Well, what if they say yes? It could be awesome. Then we can deal with what happens afterwards. So we could kind of stop over-risking everything and thinking about risk as also sometimes risk brings a reward.
I want to give you a chance to talk about your book and
Sure.
really being able to kind of tie all of this together and fix the way that we think about youth. This is the one thing everybody needs to read. Youth will be fixed.
I don't know if that's true. One of the things, when Nevin and I started this book, we interviewed a bunch of experts. Like we talked to my mentor, Scott Miller, about therapy stuff. We talked with Gordon Neufeld, who's like an attachment-based parenting guru. We talked to play expert Ellen Beat Hansen Sandcedar, who's like a legend in Norway about youth play, risky play, rough and tumble play. And while we were writing it, we saw that for the past decade, and I mean, I'm sure everything goes in circles, so I'm sure this has been going on forever. When I look at the parenting books, I saw like Tiger Mom or Free Range Kids. Like, here's the answer. Make sure you're really on your kid's ass and they're getting straight A's. Or Independence. Let your kids go free range. Do this. And I went, they're always harping on one specific factor. And then when it comes to mental health, I saw this rise of it's just the phones, or it's just the schools, or it's just, or you talk to a toxins expert, it's just the pesticides, it's just this, and we get siloed away in trying to fix one thing. And so what we did is we kind of had the mantra of youth mental health from 40,000 feet, that we zoomed out and looked at the big picture. And a lot of it resonates with what the conversations we've had, that this idea of how do you facilitate an experience of mastery? How do we really build a strong social connection in our home, in our communities, at our schools? And then the book is also, I mean, because I've done some research trying to tackle the troubled teen industry in the US. So the book we have Paris Hilton's endorsement, which is amazing because I know that we all know Ben Caldwell as well. And Ben wrote in his book, Saving Psychotherapy, about the revenge of the clients. And what Paris did was use her platform to talk about her experience at these horrible facilities and wilderness therapy programs. And what happened? Tens of thousands of young adults came out and said, yeah, I was also harmed at this place where all the licensed professionals were Joint Commission, accreditations and regulation, and nothing protect the children from harm. So I think there is it's a book about youth mental health for adults. So I think it's challenging at times, but I think it's a book, and this is the initial feedback. It's only been out for a little over a month, and it's like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And the cool part of having interviewed so many people is we get to blame them for the controversial take. And it's like, hey, we just spoke to them, and then we went and looked at the literature. So I hope it's a fun read for people and something that, touches on a range of places where things that impact young people today, which is always constructed and facilitated by adults. So we're looking at adults these days, not just kids these days.
So just to kind of put a summary in, because we are very short on time, and so I don't want to continue on, but we'll lead people back to the book. But it seems like social connection, mastery, we didn't talk about this, but gratitude and independence is what is going to promote emotional and psychological resilience for youth. And so I just want to say that's what you would be getting into if you're reading this book. And I'm definitely going to check it out because it seems like there's a lot that it says, not just about youth, but also folks who are at that stage. I think developmentally, there's some folks who are young adults who potentially still are at that stage, or folks who were especially impacted by COVID or by, those different factors that we talked about, where they're still in that more kind of adolescent phase of their life. And so thank you for sharing that stuff with us.
No, thank you for having me on. It's been a long time coming and a huge fan. And so it's really excited not only to meet you both, but to come on this podcast.
So where can people find you, and where can we link to you in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com?
Sure. So I'm on all the social media stuff. So my name is pretty unique and Will Dobud. So you can find that pretty easily. I'm also a pretty open book. So if anyone ever wants to reach out or talk about the book or talk about my outdoor therapy stuff or troubled teen industry stuff, I can talk about those sort of things. And I just love connecting with people in our field and getting to know everybody and being a part of that. Yeah, reach out, connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, X, whatever they call it now.
What's the name of your book?
My book is Kids These Days, Understanding and Supporting Youth Mental Health. And that was co-authored with Professor Nevin Harper, who's an academic and a counselor in Canada.
And like I said, we will include links to all of those things in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Make sure that you follow us on our social media, join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with this and other conversations. We're now on Substack and LinkedIn as well. So follow us over there. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy and Dr. Will Dobud.
Private practice has enough built-in complexity. Simple Practice brings notes, billing, scheduling, telehealth, insurance, and client communication into one place. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com.
With the receptionist for iPad, there's no more walking back and forth to check the waiting room for your next appointment. Receive an instant notification that your next client has arrived, securely and privately. Visit thereceptionist.com/MTSG and get your first month free.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.